Welcome to the Modern Day Slave podcast. See, the new slavery in these days is mind control. If you control the mind, you can control the people. This podcast is dedicated to the re-education and awareness of our modern influences through the examination of current and historical circumstances that have led to conditions that we now live. Welcome to your freedom. Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Day Slave podcast. This is episode number 10, and I have a special treat for the listeners today. I am extremely excited to bring you a specialist in a lot of the areas that we talk about and discuss in this podcast. Today, I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce to the community conversations Dr. Jozelle Miller, who specializes in quite a few things. Not only is she an author, but she's also a business owner who started and founded the Valeo Experience. And I'm excited to bring her into the conversation today. This is going to be much needed healing for the people as we get ready to talk about valid solutions for the people as a whole and for our communities as a whole. I'm your host, Nikia Anderson, and I want to bring in Dr. Miller to introduce herself and just tell the listeners what we need to know about her and where we can find her if we are looking for her information in the future. So, without further ado, let me bring in Dr. Miller to the feed. Good morning, Dr. Miller.
Hi, good morning.
How are you?
I'm great. And how are you?
I am doing excellent. This is an amazing pleasure for me. I want to take the time first off to thank you for joining the Modern Day Slave podcast and just thank you for your insight and for the conversation. I want to thank you in advance for the conversation and dialogue that we are about to get into. Before we do that, though, before we jump into the dialogue, I want to take this opportunity for those who do not know Dr. Jozelle Miller. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you want the listeners to know about you.
Okay, so first, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I am from the lovely island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the Eastern Caribbean. I am a health psychologist by training and profession. I'm also a resilient life coach. I'm a motivational speaker. I host a radio program every Thursday in my country, and it is dubbed Heart to Heart with Dr. Miller, where we speak about a lot of psychological issues, mental health related issues, general wellness. I am, as you said, I'm an author, and quite recently I became a best-selling author on Amazon, which I'm very happy about. I am a fun-loving person. I enjoy having a good time with family and friends. And I think most of all, I'm a Christian. So I tell persons a lot of the times that I do not look like what I've endured. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me dive into a few things that you mentioned there. Tell me a little bit about your book. So you mentioned that you are an author as well. Tell me a little bit about your book, if you would.
So I have two publications. In 2018, I wrote my first book called I Am.
Hmm.
And this is a book of affirmations because I strongly believe that there is significant power in your words. And it was basically birthed from my clinic situation where a lot of the persons I see within that setting tend to have a lot of self-esteem, self-confidence issues, mostly teenagers, young adults trying to figure out their lives and what they're about. And I thought it best to teach persons the power of your words through affirmations. What we say when we declare I am, what comes next defines your life. So it's very important that you figure out what do you want to follow after the I am. And quite recently, it's about 3 weeks now, I did a virtual launch of my second book, which is Unstuck, Creating Your Bounce Back Effect. And this book basically used some of the challenges of my own life things that I endured and
Yeah.
how I basically, showed some resilience through it and got to a place of not only surviving certain things, but thriving. And it's showed a great distinction between resilience and post-traumatic growth. So I tell persons all the time, at the end of the day, we have a choice. It's either going to be bitter or you're going to be better. Which do you want to be?
I love that. Are you going to be bitter or are you going to be better? And it's a
Yes,
choice.
sir.
I think you,
Yeah.
as you speak about I am, those
Hmm.
words, what we say and what we put out into the atmosphere absolutely has power. And
Yeah.
that is what we see in the world today. And I want to talk a little bit about that as we move forward into our conversation. So, Unstuck, tell me a little bit about the journey. You mentioned resilience as a part of
Hmm.
the literary works that you put into Unstuck. Tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about this. So, for the listeners that are out there listening, what is it that you want them to know about this particular works?
So I think there are different persons who may be able to identify with this book for a number of reasons. First, I'm a Caribbean girl, and the context of the book started by me basically explaining what it was to grow up in a small community, a small country. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have roughly about 110 persons,
Wow.
10,000 persons. So, it's very close knitted.
Hmm.
And I was a pastor's child. So I grew up having my mom as my pastor for many years. And the expectations that came with that, the challenge of having to live up to a certain representation, both from my mom and the church in itself, it stifled you. It put you in a position where you had to decide, should I just simply give up my own right as an individual, things that I may want to try? My mom, the church could be happy,
Yeah.
or do I just simply chart a course for myself and say, to hell with everything. Who is vexed, vexed, who, as we say in the Caribbean. So it showed my process through that. It also spoke about the fact that I went through a divorce. And you should know, being divorced and in the
Sorry to hear
church
that.
and in a small community like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that brought its own challenge. And one of the worst things I think anybody can endure is the jury of public opinion
Hmm.
and everybody having something to say and to add and to subtract. And the most difficult thing I've experienced to date would be losing both my parents. And,
Wow. I'm sorry
when
to hear
my
that.
mom died, yeah, thank you. When my mom died, my life transformed totally. And I went into a very dark space. I could not process understanding my own faith at that time was
Yeah.
severely questioned, because this is a young lady who grew up, understanding faith and healing and stuff like that. And then my mom dies after praying and asking God, like,
Yeah.
hey, you need to heal my mom, you need to heal my mom. And this
Yeah.
didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I went into a dark place and I had to find my way out. I had to, figure out what really matters. And, I think that's where the distinction came for me in terms of resilience. That resilience is the bounce back factor, that you get up and you bounce back. And the sad thing is that most times we think by bouncing back, you're going back to what existed before. But post-traumatic growth gives it a different twist that tells us now that there's a lesson to be learned in everything, which means that you may not go back to what existed before, but you have to create something new. You have to create that novel experience and start charting a new course to move forward.
Preach. Preach. Well, thank you for sharing that information with the authors. And you mentioned a little bit about your faith at the very beginning as well. You mentioned most importantly that you are a Christian. Tell us about how your faith helped you through a lot of these moments that you discuss in Unstuck.
So, you know what? When you grew up in the church, it becomes a routine. You get up, you say your prayers, in the Caribbean lifestyle, it's like go in and say your prayers, go in and say your prayers, you read your Bible, come out, and you have devotions with the family. You go to church. You get to be in a lot of the activities of the church. But for a lot of us as PKs, from the outside looking in, a lot of persons did not understand the sacrifice that it took. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what helped me throughout my life was when I fully understood who Christ was for me and that relationship for myself, as opposed to being something that was handed down third party by my mom or anyone else. I had to decide, do I believe in this God? Do I understand what it is to have faith? And it transformed something for me. So it wasn't just about doing all of these things because I'm expected to, but I did it because I felt it was necessary for me to give honor to the God who created me, give honor
That's
to
right.
the one who is giving me breath every day. And even when the hardships come, He's the one who still sustains and creates a smile on my face.
That's right.
Because had it not been for Him, hmm, child, let me tell you, it would have been something else. But I think my relationship with God has been my foundation. It really propels me through a lot of difficult situations.
Yeah, and the thing about faith implies that you're going to take that step no matter if you're doing it in darkness or no matter if you're
Yeah,
doing it in light, right? And
yeah.
so, just you explaining, what really made you through. It was a choice.
Hmm.
Every individual, every human being has that choice as to whether or not they're going to choose to follow the steps of God and listen to his voice, even though we're in the middle of our storms that we're going through.
Yeah,
He tells us that there's still sunshine on the other side of that storm
yeah.
that he has for us. And so, thanks be to him for, not only
Mhm.
bringing you through those moments, but continuing to strengthen your faith and strengthen your walk as you continue your journey in this thing we call life.
And it's not easy. I think that's one of the things that people think that by virtue of you saying that you're a Christian, that it becomes magical. Like there's this magical one that's going to, whoo, and everything disappears and everything is fine. But it is through the adversity, I think that we grow and we develop. You learn that grit. You learn to actually, you know, swim. One of the
Yeah.
things we do in the Caribbean, normally I think in other territories, persons go into a nice controlled pool and persons are teaching you how to swim. But in the Caribbean, we go to the edge of the harbor or the jetty, as we call it, and they take the kids and they throw the kids over, and you just have to figure out how to
Sink or
start
swim.
swimming, sink or swim. And I think that's just how life is, that God allows certain things just for us to find our footing, and not only that, for us to recognize who He is amidst all that is going on.
Yeah, that's life's journey. Life journey is filled full of moments of turmoil and situations. And it's not a matter of if you experience those things, it's a matter of when you experience those things.
Yeah.
And so, it is important. It is extremely important, especially for those who discern the times that we're in right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that I want to shift our conversation and talk a little bit about that. Now, the other part of, something that you haven't really introduced us to is being a health psychologist expert. Tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about what that means, and then I want to get into some conversation around some of the things that you see in your community there in St. Vincent and
So,
the
as a health
Grenadines.
psychologist, one of the main things that I do is help persons cope with chronic illnesses, mental health challenges, and basically help them navigate through certain things. I assist as it relates to policies within the
Hmm.
Ministry of Health here in St. Vincent. I facilitate some wellness programs and get persons to understand holistic development as opposed to just one area. Because when persons think of health, they start thinking physical, physiological, and they forget
Hmm.
other aspects. And one of the things I stress is holistic wellness. Holistic wellness meaning that you have to think about your finances, you have to think about the emotional, the social aspect, the physical aspect, your intellectual, all of these things that work together. Because when we have a deficit in one area, it basically affects the whole thing. So we all have to now try at different points to juggle all of these areas and make sure that they are synchronized, that there is some alignment, because where there is any disconnect, it creates some fixations that can have other mental health challenges emerging.
Yeah, and we're on the precipice of Mental Health Month, right? And a lot of the episodes that I recorded in last month were focused on some of the mental health aspects,
Yeah.
especially from, a Western point of view. And the reason I say Western point of view is our society operates and runs a little bit different from what you see typically in a Middle Eastern or the Eastern view of things, right? And so that's where I want to shift our conversation to talking about. You mentioned a little bit earlier about being and working with the health ministry there in St. Vincent. Tell me about some of those activities, some of the things that you see in the community, and some of the struggles that the community is going through there in St. Vincent.
So one of the things as it relates to mental health in St. Vincent, it is still an area that persons are not comfortable with. As you said, there's a big difference with the Western society. So there is still a stigma attached that once persons hear about psychology or psychiatry, you start thinking that you're going to be locked away in an asylum or institutionalized. And
And you're
persons
not
do not,
strong.
yeah, and persons start thinking of probably some spiritual issue. So it has really been a challenge over the years to get persons to fully grasp and understand that all of us have need for mental, if you want to say rehabilitation, that we all have to take the time to invest into our mental health. And I distinguish a lot within the ministry the difference between mental illness and mental health or mental wellness. And mental wellness means your day to day functioning. It looks in terms of how you process information, your emotional state, your ability to regulate your emotions, whether or not you're always angry or you're always sad, to identify your triggers, identify those things that, basically causes you not to respond in the best way possible. Um, One of the things that we have been doing a lot of is mental health awareness, going around and making sure that persons understand the importance of things related to your mental functioning. We have had a lot of interactions with the school children, college age, and we try to stress a lot about self-esteem and self-confidence development because all of this really taps into your mental wellness.
Yeah, thank you for sharing just your thoughts on that. And then what about some things that are going on there specific in St. Vincent? So you mentioned working with the children's school or the college age students as well, and just what they speak into the universe or what they speak into the world typically becomes who they are. So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about just some of the things that you've been doing there on the ground.
Okay, so we would have had sessions, as I said, with the children. Um, like quite recently, we have had our volcanic eruption. I'm not sure if you're aware,
Mm-hmm.
but after 42 years of
Mm-hmm. Of
being
being dormant.
being dormant, and then poof, we have to now juggle not only the pandemic issue,
Mm-hmm.
but we have to now juggle the volcanic eruption. And we would have had some of the mental health professionals going in, working with the children to do this program called Return to Happiness. We have been helping the adults manage anxiety, manage your expectations, um, doing a lot of resilience counseling and
Mm-hmm.
motivational counseling because persons who have lost it all in terms of their homes, their livelihood, you have to
Yeah.
start positioning them now to understand that you can still build again. You can pick yourself up, and we have to start being creative and innovative to figure out what the next step is going to be. Um, we have been working a lot with parents as well because
Mm-hmm.
since the pandemic, obviously, a lot of changes have taken place within the school system. And even things like graduations, where a lot of children and teenagers look forward to that prom and graduation experience that was taken from them because of COVID. And a lot of these things had to be cancelled. So we had to work with the parents as well to be that supportive system and to find creative ways to even make sure that your children are okay. And
Hmm.
that's something that is very significant, making sure that people are okay. Actually taking the time when you ask, how are you doing, to actually pause to listen and appreciate that what persons sometimes say may not be actually what is demonstrated physically. So we want to have that sort
Yeah.
of alignment now by looking deeply into someone's eyes and figure out, are you really okay?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about this? What's really going on? Because so often we hide so many things. We wear a mask just as we are
Yeah.
being told to do now with COVID. We have been wearing a mask for so long because so often we pretend to be okay because we are afraid of judgment. We are afraid that persons might, ridicule or laugh at us or different things. So persons pretend, and it's very important that we unmask even as we mask to protect ourselves from COVID-19.
Yeah, and I love that analogy because, as they say when you get on a plane, it's important that you put your mask on
Yeah,
before helping others. And so tell me how
yeah.
you have dealt with, the things that it's not easy to handle the situations that are going on in the world. Specifically, if you think about the pandemic, the shift that took
Hmm.
place there, specifically when you're dealing with, a volcanic eruption that's happening on the island,
Yeah.
people's problems become your weight, they become your baggage, right? How do
Hmm.
you personally decompress from those things and put on your mask before helping others?
So self-care has become the go-to phrase, and self-care for me pretty much was, I had to know when it was too much and I detached myself. And so I had to set up boundaries. I know exactly that I'm going to put in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours today. After that time, I'm going to now separate myself. And I'm very introverted. So persons may not notice because I'm always in the public's eye for some
Hmm.
reason, but I'm introverted in terms of how I regroup. So for me, I have to go quiet. I have to pull myself away. I have to be
Yeah.
silent. I have to just simply allow, everything to just simply decompress,
Hmm.
take some deep breaths. I enjoy watching major crimes on television. So I will tap into that and just go into my investigative mode, trying to figure out the plot. Um, Sleep is also something that works well for me. And I love to dance as well as fitness. So I go running or I go to the gym. These are the things that really help me. Um, and this is like for my own personal quiet time. Outside of that, spending time with family. My nephew, he's 6 and he is rambunctious at 6. So he keeps me busy as well. And that's how I just simply keep it rolling from one day to the next.
And that's awesome. Thank you for that because I think that provides the listeners with a lot of encouragement of things that they can do, tangible things that they can do
Yeah,
that allow for the ability for them to take care of self. That's important, people. I cannot stress it enough how important it is to truly take care of yourself. You don't know until you've experienced something that knocks you down
yeah.
the impacts of what it means to really be healthy yourself. So please, don't take my words. Take Dr. Miller's words in this example as something that you can do tangibly every day and just activities. And I think it implies that you really truly have to get to know yourself as well, right? You mentioned being an introvert, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
truly have to understand, how do I operate? What makes me tick? What makes me move forward? What keeps me from moving forward? You have to understand those things because in understanding those things, it truly allows you to be in a place mentally to where you're able to handle the things that come in life.
and just as you said that, the word that pops out at me is authenticity. Too many persons are pretending. We have to stop the pretense because you are doing yourself a great injustice and taking the time to actually know who you are. spending time with yourself. A lot of persons shy away from this because, oh my God, I think I'm going crazy or something if I have to start, processing a lot of information by myself. So we like to be around people all the time. And I think that was one of the things that happened with COVID-19 for a lot of persons. You had to isolate, you had to pull away. And a lot of persons did not cope well with that because, it is never the practice to actually spend time with yourself. And I tell persons, find hobbies, find things that you like, find things that you can do by yourself. And it is not an issue. It is not detaching yourself from other persons. It is just understanding what you need in that moment for yourself. And be authentic in terms of how you treat yourself. Because sometimes persons as well, we tend to lend ourselves to being treated anyway, any particular way by other persons. And I say all the time, we teach people how to treat us based on what we keep accepting. And a lot of persons succumb to abusive situations because for yourself, you haven't identified your boundaries. You haven't identified the things that are, deal breakers. So every time you keep saying, oh, it's going to get better tomorrow, but you have given
Yeah.
over your power to someone else. You have to now regain that power of understanding that this is what I need to be okay. And you have to communicate that so that persons understand that this is what is needed. So right now I come home, and if you're
Hmm.
living with persons and I say I need 10 minutes, mommy
Yeah.
needs 10 minutes quiet,
Yeah.
undisturbed, and other persons understand now that okay, this is a quiet time. Shh, you know
Yeah.
and they just allow you to be that in that space for 10 minutes, and you come back refreshed and you're ready
Yeah.
now to reconnect. But if we don't do that, if we don't allow persons to know what we need, we are always going to feel as if we are stretched too thinly,
Yeah.
as if we are being basically abused, from time to time.
Yeah. And another thing that I think about as I you mentioned the 10 minutes break that you take each day. That 10 minutes is important. We call it. I'm a learning and development specialist in my day-to-day job, and we call it brain breaks. Right. So there's so much.
Yeah.
There's only so much information that a person can soak in or take in before the
Hmm.
brain tends to shut down. And
Hmm.
so we
Hmm.
call it brain break because you're giving yourself that mental break to refocus. And it's not focused on anything that they're learning at the moment. It's completely off topic, but it allows them to get a reset.
Yes,
So, it's
yes,
kind of like a reboot, just like a computer. If the computer has been on for so long, it needs that reboot. So
yes,
thank you for
definitely.
sharing those tips with us. I want to shift our conversation in the last remaining moments that we have today to talk about something that's super important. Now, as the title of this podcast is The Modern Day Slave. Now, as we
Yeah.
know, the years upon years of chattel slavery has ended.
Hmm.
However, the attacks of the enemy has. Now, I know that you talked a little bit earlier about your faith and about the things that are going on. So, I want to talk about one, the impacts that you see from a Western society standpoint of the years of chattel slavery, but then how do we tangibly move forward? How do we come up with solutions to move beyond that into what God has for us?
Recognition. I think for so many persons, we have not fully recognized that we are somewhat enslaved by certain things, certain thought processes, things that have been handed down from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And, we basically continue on without questioning certain things. And I am a person now who encourage people to challenge what exists.
Hmm.
If you have something that you're not sure about, ask the question. Why are we doing this? Why are we treated this way? Why can't this be the norm as opposed to X being the norm? And I always go back to um, Bob Marley, I think.
Uh huh.
Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds.
That's right.
We have to channel and understand that you have the power first and foremost. And the power comes from recognizing first, recognition, When you recognize what exists, when you identify it, and when you now purposefully decide to challenge what exists, that's when change begins. And it's also understanding that in some instances, it's not even about a group effort, but individual effort goes a long way. Sometimes you are the pioneer or the visionary, that you can be impressed, or something can be impressed upon you to do a particular thing, and we're thinking, I can't do this because I don't have the support. Even the fact that you started this podcast with such an interesting name, this again is a game changer, because by virtue of listening and looking at this terminology, the modern day slave, it makes you question, how am I still enslaving myself? And these are the things that we have to continually do. As it relates to the spiritual aspect, one of the things I always tell persons, there is not a great disconnect between what's in the Bible and what we see obtaining on a daily basis, because the words in the Bible are true and they are manifested in different things. And one of the scripture verses that always resonates with me is the renewing of mind. Be ye therefore transformed by the
Mm-hmm.
renewing of your mind, a daily process, because
That's
the
right.
enemy taps into your mental space. And once he gets in there and he takes control, then he has control of you and everything that you do. So we have to always filter. It means in filtering, you have to process the information that comes into your senses, what we see, what we hear.
Mm-hmm.
These things are very important. So you have to start telling yourself, I'm not going to expose myself to certain things, whether it is pornography, music that has a
Mm-hmm.
lot of profanity or violence. You have to start telling yourself that I'm going to listen to things that are more uplifting, that speaks to my character building. You have to start telling yourself that even some persons that you are around, that they are not beneficial to your journey. And I think one of the things that happens too often is that we tend to hold ourselves captive in a space out of
Yep.
obligation. And obligation is a slave master.
Mm-hmm.
Obligation whereby we keep telling ourselves, I can't, I'm obligated to stay with this person because they helped me once or they did this. And people tend to want to remind you, you remember what I did for you?
Mm-hmm.
When are you going to repay that debt though? When are you going to repay the debt? Think about it. Is it that you're going to spend the rest of your life on earth repaying a debt that somebody did 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah.
You have to know when you have outgrown a space, and
That's it.
the toxicity that comes when you have outgrown a space and you remain there. I use the analogy of decay. So like, when we
Mm-hmm.
think of a space, we have some water that becomes stagnant. And stagnant water, no movement, it means now it is going to be a place for bacteria to fester.
Yep.
It is going to become deadly because you're going to have mosquitoes, you're going to have
Mm-hmm.
all other sorts of creatures and other things living within that space. And that is detrimental to you as an individual. So you have to ask yourself, am I growing where I am? And if you have stopped growing, if there is no movement, understand that you're decaying, you're
That's
dying.
it.
And you have to tell yourself that you're worth more than just simply out of obligation staying here and allowing yourself to die, allowing your dreams to die, allowing, your aspirations and everything to just disappear because I feel obligated to remain. No, we have to get rid of that and renew the mind constantly.
Constantly renewal of the mind. That is, one of my favorite scriptures as well.
Yeah,
And we'll get into, in just a second. I'll give you an opportunity to respond to this, but I want to highlight just a few things because you said a mouthful just then. The generational curses. You have to
yeah.
realize that those things exist. The things that were
Hmm.
passed down from generation to generation becomes a tradition. Well, what is tradition? It's instructions passed down by dead people. Now, not
Yeah.
saying that all traditions are bad, but we have to examine those things. Think about the Pharisees and Sadducees of old. Those were the religious leaders, and they had become so ingrained into the tradition of the law that they lost the reason why the law was created in the first place, in order to
First
be able to
place. Yeah.
purify them and bring them closer to the one who created them.
Hmm.
You mentioned asking the questions. You reminded me of a concept called the five whys. You
Yeah.
continue, and this concept, I'm sure you've heard of it, is that
Hmm.
you continue to ask the question why until you get to the root of a problem.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you ask
Hmm.
it 5 times. Okay, well, why is that? Well, okay, thank you for that response, but why is this? So you
Yeah.
continue to ask that why until you get to the root of a problem. And we have to really truly get to the root of what it is that is our master. You gave us several examples of things
Yeah.
as well. Music is super important. I keep telling the youth this all the time
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
music has the place to put you in either life or death, depending on what is being stated over that music. And so it is
Exactly.
important. We think about David, right? When David would sing to Saul, it
Hmm.
said that the evil spirits left Saul. That
Yeah.
shows you the power right there
Power.
in
Yeah.
music.
Hmm.
It is extremely powerful. And then you talked about separation. See, sometimes, and I say this all the time, elevation requires separation. You have to learn when people are there for a season and
Hmm.
when people are permanent in your life. You have to discern that fact.
Yeah.
And that's important. So, those are a few things I wanted to highlight from what you said there. Um, for the time that we have here, I want to highlight just some scripture that's very important to me, and I think it's vital. But Galatians 5, if you start there at about start about verse 16, and you go
Hmm.
all the way down to 26, and it talks about the things that are of the flesh, the things that are of the spirit, and then it talks about the fact that the things that are of the spirit, there is no law against those things. And it
Hmm.
talks about loving your neighbor as yourself.
South. Yeah. Hmm.
Talk to me about what it means to truly love someone as yourself.
Ah, listen, that has been something that I have been saying repeatedly. And the sad reality is, a lot of persons are in a situation where they don't love themselves. And if you do not love yourself, how can you love someone else?
Mm-hmm.
And then I also throw in the other part that says God is love. And if you are at a point where you do not believe or you haven't received God's love, can you truly love someone else? And we have to get to the place of understanding love for ourselves. What does it mean to be loved? How do you want to be loved? And understand that we all perhaps may want to be loved differently. So we have to take the time. And this is probably where the love languages came in, that persons understand that there are different ways in which you can love someone. The bottom line, however, I think embedded in love is respect and honor.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to understand that I respect you as a human being. I see you and I understand that you were created and there is purpose for your creation. And by virtue of that, I have an honor and a respect for you, that even where we differ, where we may not be in alignment in terms of some of the ideologies that we carry or the lifestyle, the behaviors, I still respect you enough to know that I'm going to treat you as, with a particular sense of pride. I'm going to make sure that I do not do anything that is going to diminish you as an individual.
Mm.
But too often we have persons who have the superiority inferiority complex that
Yes.
says that I am better than you and we are better than no one. I tell persons all the time, you can have as many accolades, you can have all the credentials,
Mm-hmm.
but your character speaks about who you are when no one else is looking. What are those things that you tend to do that if somebody is to find out, would you be happy? Would you be okay?
Mm-hmm.
When you can tap into that and you can understand your true character, you're better able now to be around others, to love people, to appreciate people. But again, It is about self-respect, self-love, self-honor. It starts there and then it transcends that you will know how to offer that by first knowing how to take care of you.
Oh my goodness. Woo. And we are the human family, right?
Yeah,
If we are
yeah.
the human family, we should see others as human and erase that complex of, as you mentioned, supremacy or superiority and
Hmm.
inferiority. I
Yeah,
think it was Henry Highland Garland, who was a writer back in the day, who wrote about the complex of superiority and inferiority. And in his words, he talked about the fact that we are of the human family. And
yeah.
as Acts says, out of one blood, many,
Many.
which
Hmm.
means that we as people are a creation from one blood. And if we're a
Hmm.
creation from one blood, we should operate under that precipice of being that creation. So, wow, thank you for sharing that. That was a blessing to the listeners that are out there tuning in to this episode. So, lastly, I know we've got a few minutes left. First off, where can we find you? How can we get in contact with you? And what do you want to be your ending message as we get ready to conclude in today's episode of the Modern Day Slave Podcast, Community
Right.
Conversations?
So I'm available on Facebook. I can be found on Facebook, on Instagram, LinkedIn. On Facebook, you can look for Jozelle Miller, or you can look for the Valeo Experience, which is Valeo Experience. Or on Facebook as well, it is renewed underscore resilience life coaching with Dr. Miller. On Instagram, it is Valeo underscore inspired and Valeo SVG. On LinkedIn, I'm Dr. Jozelle Miller. And you ask about what would I want to leave with? I think, you know what? Probably what I started with. We have to make a choice. Are you going to be bitter or are you going to be better? And I tend to always tell persons at the end of the day, what truly matters? Ask yourself that question. And one of the things that I do in therapy, as well as even with my coaching practice, I tell persons, write your eulogy. And people go like, what? You want me to write my eulogy? I'm alive. What's going on? I'm like, yeah. If you had the opportunity to hear your eulogy read today, what would it say?
Say, that's right.
And if it is that what you're doing in your life now, you're not happy with it because you would not want persons to remember you that way, this is the day for you to begin changing. This is the moment that tells you, I need to make a change. I need to start scripting a new narrative. I need to make sure that whenever my eyes close and a eulogy is being read over me, that, my spirit is at peace, you know, and it's a very important way to live because it shows you how important your choices are. I think too often we put things off and we say, in 5 years, I'm going to be this. I'm going to just live life and do things, whatever. Everything that we do today is
That's
going
right.
to affect our future,
Only
you
today is
know?
guaranteed.
Only today
Only
is
today.
guaranteed. So we have to put our best foot forward. And every day I go onto the Valeo Experience Facebook page and I do a live where I do mental health tips and, emotional guidance and all of that. And I try to let persons understand that we have to craft the best version of ourselves. And you have to do that one decision and one choice at a time. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And I am an Unstuck. Where can we find those?
Amazon. They're both available on Amazon at the moment. And well, for persons in St. Vincent, if within another week or two, hopefully, I'm going to get some hard copies here because persons have been asking. But everything right now is on Amazon.
That is a good problem to have. So, again, Dr. Jozelle Miller, it has been an extreme privilege to have you on today and just to really pour into us. We talk about that, concept of the human family, and today you have really poured from your cup into the listeners that are out there. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for blessing the audience with your perspective, with your words, and just with your experiences. I think others can learn, and I fervently believe this, that we can learn from the experience of others. So thank you for being on the Modern Day Slave podcast today.
Most definitely. It was such a pleasure. You are a joy. Thank you so much for having me. And who knows, maybe we can do this again.
Absolutely. I'd love to have you on again. So absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye. So again, this has been episode number 10 of the Modern Day Slave podcast. I'm your host, Nikia Anderson. Please go out, follow, and listen to Dr. Jozelle Miller. She has a wealth of knowledge and experience in not only psychology, but what she's doing there in the community of St. Vincent. And, we can all learn from a lot of the different things that she talked about and discussed in today's episode. So until we see you again, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Please share this, download a copy, as well as check out the new Patreon page, which we have just recently published. It's patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Nikia. I'm your host, Nikia Anderson, and I am out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in.